Hello, hello, and welcome to the inaugural Film Hunt podcast. I'm going to be your host, the great Zaxby, but you can just call me Zaxby. I have been doing film criticism on and off for about 10 years now, in a very non-professional manner. I have done some writing, some reviews, and mainly just talking film with friends and family, and this is going to be an outlet for me to do that on the internet and see how this goes. I've never ran my own podcast. I've been a part of podcasts before, but this is a whole new thing for me to do on my own. So thank you for joining me. I am an English lit major by trade. I specialized in early modern Renaissance lit in college, and that landed me a job as a bartender, then bar owner, and yeah, now we're going to see if there's something here to this film criticism thing. I love film. I've been going to film festivals since high school. I delved extensively into the writing side of things, obviously. I love to talk about movies, probably too much. So this will be a good creative outlet for me. That way I'm not just talking all my friends' ears off with my sometimes esoteric knowledge of this medium. Currently living in Reno, Nevada, and that limits my viewing somewhat. Thankfully, with streaming these days, it's a lot easier to get to a lot more films. That's a double-edged sword because I love going to the movies. I love the experience of watching a movie in the theater, and I get to a handful of those as well. This year I have seen over 40 movies from 2024 specifically, so I have a decent grasp on the current landscape of cinema, but there's always room to learn more, and that's also part of what I hope this podcast does. The goals of this podcast. Well, my main thing with the podcast is I want to do deep dives with film. I don't want to do just surface level lists of, hey, here's 5 movies you should go see on this subject, or 5 movies that stars a certain one of your favorite actors, or stuff like that. It's very surface level, and there will be some of that, but my main focus is going to be deep diving into a movie selected by you, the listener, for the most part. I want to start a community with this podcast where you feel engaged, commenting, asking me to talk about your favorite movie, maybe just a movie that you would like my insight on, maybe a movie that you want to force me to watch because you know it's against what I would like, and that could be fun too. And in return, whatever movie I deep dive into per episode, I want to return with another movie that I think should be a good double feature for it. Usually I want to do something that you might not have heard of, but that's kind of my idea, is to start a steamrolling thing where I talk about something you guys want to, and then I spend the last third of the podcast episode talking about what I think would be a good follow-up. I have no idea if this is going to work. I think it's an intriguing idea. I think that there's enough of an audience that I have around myself, but also that I want to build into something bigger. So if that appeals to you, stick around. I want to have weekly podcasts where I do just maybe 30 to 40 minute deep dives into a film. I will rewatch any movie that you send my way, and I choose to review. There will be a selection process, maybe whatever's the most liked comment of that week gets rolled over into the lineup, something like that. However, I know that this is all just a theory of a potentially good podcast that I could use to maybe broaden your knowledge, maybe give you something new to watch. There'll be different segments here and there that I do that aren't just me talking for forever. I want to have some guests that I think would be very interesting. I want to have some more engaging content for you than just me talking, because that would get old fast. Trust me. I have some basic knowledge of editing, and that's all obviously going to be one of the things that I get better at through this. Also, just feeling comfortable in front of the camera. With that, I'm very open to suggestions that you would have for content that you would like to listen to or you would like to be discussed on this podcast. I think one of the best ways to grow it is going to get the community involved and get people wanting to listen the next week to something that they suggest that they are interested in this glorious medium of film. I, at the end of the day, just love movies, and I'm here to talk about movies with you. So if that's at all something you'd be interested in, these are going to be a little bit more bite-sized, at least when it's just me. When we have guests, I expect the format to go a little bit longer. But with that, that's just a little introduction on myself. Now, let's get to hunting some films, huh? Especially in such a great year as we had in 2024.
You talking to me? You talking to me? You talking to me? Well, then who the hell else are you talking to? Talking to me? Well, I'm the only one here. Who the fuck do you think you're talking to?
So 2024 was a banner year for film. Massive. I cannot express how much I love my top 5, which we will get into in a little bit. But out of the 40 plus movies that I saw this year, I would say the top 15 are all excellent. And I would stand behind them in one way or another and say that they're great films. Top 5, damn near masterpieces. And the thing that stuck out to me about 2024 was it wasn't just a single genre or a single type of film that really stuck out to me. I loved some of the blockbusters for being just spectacles and great filmmaking in their own right. And as you'll see in my top 5, I also mainly lean towards indie and art house cinema. That's just my way of leaning. I know that's not for everybody, but I want to cover a little bit of everything because I think 2024 had a little bit of everything. It had your massive blockbusters like Dune that completely blew the lid off of what cinematography can be in those big budget productions, to the point where it's brought cinephiles and common audiences together in a way that I haven't seen before. Dune has been maybe the pinnacle of that, but there are others from last year that did similar things with big budgets that were very impressive. And it kind of brings to light that the landscape of film right now is all over the place. Sure, streaming is still kind of number one on people's minds when it comes to watching movies. It's been that way since the pandemic. However, there have been a handful of releases that have done only theatrical releases at first this year. That kind of started with the Top Gun Maverick initiative to only release in theaters coming back from the pandemic. If you remember that, it was a big push for that movie, and it's kind of continued on in a lot of the releases this year, including Dune, including Nosferatu. So some of these big releases, especially the popcorn flicks, which, if you remember the popcorn bucket from Dune, you know what I'm talking about. They've decided to try and keep the cinemas alive, and I respect that. On the other hand, these streaming platforms have also given a platform to movies you would never have seen before. My number one is a great example of this that I would have never seen without Netflix. And there is value to that as well. I don't know where the right and wrong line on that is, but I do know that more films in more hands for people to tell stories is always a good thing, no matter how much money is backing it or where they release their movies. And the reality of our current landscape of cinema is independent film is getting such a voice from these streaming services. And it's pretty cool to see because theaters aren't going to go out of their way to bring these little guys on board when they're strapped for spending money as it is. So even with my breadth of knowledge on the 2024 year, there's still a lot that I have on my watch list that could potentially end up making my top end of the year list. I know. I did not get to see Conclave, unfortunately, even though Ralph Fiennes is getting massive recognition, and I always love that because Ralph Fiennes is one of our finest working actors. So that's on my list. I didn't get to Nickel Boys either. Nickel Boys is getting a lot of critical acclaim. It kind of came out of nowhere at the end of this year. I know it made some festival circuits and stuff earlier in the year, but it's really gotten a lot of traction going into award season, and we'll see if it gets anything, but I really want to see that. Heard some very good things about it, and really my biggest miss of last year, and I didn't miss it because I missed it. I missed it because I didn't have access to watch it. Again, with Reno, Nevada not being the biggest market for art house independent cinema and it not being available on any streaming services, this movie called Sing Sing is like if you took all of my favorite movies, all of my favorite aspects of film, put it into an AI generator, it would pop out Sing Sing. It is a movie from A24, who they do amazing work. If you didn't know, they're probably our best working production company. And it's about a group of inmates reenacting Shakespeare plays in prison, helps them to cope and helps them to realize their place in society and their value as members of the human race. And man, I know I'm going to love it. Like sometimes you just get the sense from a movie's description and its premise that you're like, there's no way I'm not going to love that. And that's one that I cannot wait to get to. So thematically, this last year in film has been an interesting one. There's been a lot of through lines with a lot of different styles of film that aren't necessarily common every year. Usually you get kind of a general theme of movies where coming of age stories are really popular. Oh, I don't know, Marvel's really popular, whatever it is. This year, we had a lot of genre films breaking the mold of what you traditionally expect from a genre film. And what do I mean by genre film? I mean your big budget action movies. I mean your spy thrillers. I mean your rom-coms. I mean your general easy to go to, easy to digest. You know what you're getting out of the movie. There were a lot this year that actually took those genres and flipped them on their head in a lot of ways that I found very interesting. These include Dune. The cinematography in Dune is second to none when it comes to that scale of movie. It starts with that amazing sequence of those astronauts traversing the mountain, and it's like operatic in its depiction of it. It's almost like dancers dancing up a mountain with the sun in the background, and oh man, gorgeous scene. One you don't see in that type of film all the time. Denis Villeneuve, he knows his source material, and he knows that he can play around with the camera in interesting ways and not just provide a sci-fi action film, right? That was true with the first Dune. It's even more true of Dune 2. I think I liked the first Dune, but it felt like a prologue, right? It felt like it was cut at the knees because it wasn't a full story. And then later, you get that crazy Coliseum scene in the black and white or the negative, whatever you want to call it, perspective. That is just one of the scenes of the year. And then you have something like The Hitman, directed by Richard Linklater, that takes the spy genre. I don't even know if it's a spy genre. It's more of like an undercover cop genre, and turns it into a love story with two criminals where the tagline could have been "My freak matches her freak," is basically the premise of the love story. And it is so entertaining and it is so fun. And obviously I expected that from Linklater and Glen Powell, which Glen Powell had a hell of a year, if you didn't know. And this movie has some of the best electricity I've ever seen between two leads in a spy rom-com. Like, that doesn't happen. I mean, a little bit with Mr. and Mrs. Smith might be the closest comparison, but even then, that was highly stylized. And this movie's a little messy. Like, it gets dirty and it gets raw, and it's just a hell of a ride, man. I really enjoyed on Netflix Rebel Road from this year as well. It's kind of a revenge film. It's kind of a cop drama with some racial profiling elements involved. You could watch it almost as just a straight up action movie, but it's got these undertones to it that it does some really interesting things with the violence and how the main protagonist is trying to avoid killing. It's doing some things that you don't necessarily expect from a movie with its description. So I really liked that theme throughout this year. Movies that you would go into expecting something, and you got that from those movies. You got the action, and you got the rom-com, and you got that, but they're also doing something deeper, and they have a lot more to say about our current environment. They have a lot to say about either political structures or relationship standards or stuff like that, and maybe the epitome of that. And this is by no way close to my top of the year, but I did enjoy it a bit more than a lot of people did, was Joker, Folie à Deux. And you can't get through 2024 without talking about this thing because it caused some drama. People hated this movie. And there were some that defended it. But it's taking an anti-hero superhero movie like the first one was, which appealed to a lot more people than Folie à Deux did, and it turned it into a musical romance. And it kind of worked if you weren't going in expecting Joker 2, which it is not in terms of like a direct sequel. It's a sequel because it has the same actor playing Joker, and it's got a similar style of cinematography, but it also does so many bizarre things. And it is so weird. And I kind of loved it for that. For basically taking the formula from the first one, chucking it out the window, and saying, we're going to be controversial in a different way. And there's something to be commended about that. I did enjoy the fact that I went into the theater, or I put on a movie at home more times than not, and was surprised this year by what I got from that viewing. And I find value in that. Even if it didn't work, like Joker, in the end, it's a very flawed film. But I appreciate that they did a little bit of a switcheroo there, and I thought it was pretty fun. Another common theme that I kind of picked out, mainly in the critical circles, has been the use of vulgarity in movies that are getting a lot of acclaim. a lot of times body horror and overt sexualization and over the top drug use doesn't really always play to critical acclaim. And this year has been almost the complete opposite, with the Best Picture hopeful in Anora being like the front runner for the Academy Award, and the lead actress, Mikey Madison, getting some of the biggest Oscar buzz that I've seen in a while. And it's a rough film. It's about sex work, it's about drugs, it's about Russian oligarchy. Like there's a lot going on in this movie, and it's kind of sensory overload, especially in the first half, I would say. To the point where the Academy and critical response doesn't always respond to that. And they really went for this movie, which I like. Um, Anora's just outside of my top five. I did very much enjoy it. It's in my top 10. And Mikey Madison deserves all the praise that she gets. But films like these, they don't always take off with critics. And this one really has. Along the same vein is The Substance with Demi Moore, which I freaking loved. It's one of the biggest mind trips you can take, at least from last year at the movies. And Demi Moore is fantastic in it. The script is insane, but awesome. It's almost like, how did I refer to it in my review? So it's like the perverted side of Barbie. Like if you took Barbie and added body horror and all these dark elements to it. And it's a wild ride that really sticks the landing, in my opinion, with all of these elements of dysmorphism and just destroying our bodies for public appeal. And I'm really happy that that one's also getting a lot of critical acclaim. And then the last one, this one's a bit different because it is a horror movie, but Nosferatu is an interesting case because Nosferatu debuted in theaters on Christmas Day. And that really, really took me back. Christmas Day, theaters save those slots for families that are looking for just feel good. Let's go to the movies after family gathering. Grandma can go. Johnny can go. That's usually what they're reserved for. And for Nosferatu to come out on Christmas Day, and it hasn't been lighting up the charts critically, like it's gotten a good reception. And there's going to be some nominations for it this award season. But it is not a Christmas movie. They reference Christmas at one point, but it is also a body horror, deeply graphic, and highly sexualized film that has somehow become part of the blockbuster zeitgeist of this year. Which, good for Dave Eggers, because he deserves it. I like all of his movies a lot. This might be right behind The Lighthouse for me in terms of rankings, but he's a director that deserves his due, and this is probably his most accessible movie. And it's also just a fun ride. It's funny in some parts, ironically. It's grotesque in a lot of parts, and it kind of stays with you with some of the imagery and some of the scenes. And then ultimately, I think the biggest theme of this year, which probably shouldn't be surprising, just given our political climate and the general direction that artists are taking with what they tell stories about these days, but it's rebellion. And I know that's a very general term, but if you look at the movies from this year that I wrote down, I mean, first and foremost, Civil War, Amelia Perez, which is also another bizarre movie that is cool that it's getting critical acclaim, even though I didn't really go for it that much. I appreciate what it was going for, dealing with trans subjects, dealing with cartel subjects, which is a bizarre combination, and then setting it all in a musical. Like, it's our second musical this year that is very, very jarring. That and Joker. And when's the last time a musical was like trying to be offensive and trying to be a satire on society? Even something like Furiosa was a good example of something rebelling against a oppressive power that maybe not as good as Fury Road. I mean, definitely not as good as Fury Road. Fury Road is one of the best movies of the last 20 years. But Furiosa did some interesting things that also kind of separated it from its predecessor. There's a little indie film from Bucharest in Romania called Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World. And it's just out of my top 5. I was really floored by it, especially the second half. The first half is pretty rough to get through if you're not into slow burn dramas about being overworked. I guess is the best way to put it. But man, it really takes off in the second half. And it has so much to say about late stage capitalism, the collapse of a social structure that takes care of the lower class in any way. And while I won't recommend it to everyone, I think it's worth watching if that sounds interesting to you at all. And you're into a 3-hour Romanian, mainly black and white film, it was right up my alley. But I understand that I can't recommend that to everyone. But it is very well done and very impactful. And then the last movie under the Rebellion theme is my favorite movie of the year. So I'm not going to reveal that just quite yet because you got to build a little intrigue, right? But we will get to it, I promise. So now what I think I want to do is I want to just rapid fire my top 5. And that way we can get it out of the way. And I can then start to do a little bit of a deep dive into all of them. My 1 through 5 are definitely interchangeable in a lot of ways. I would have a hard time picking a favorite from 2 through 5 because they all have their own merit in my mind of why they would be better than the other. My number 1 is definitely my favorite. I've seen it at least 5 times now, and I might see it again before I even finish editing this video. It's the one that hooked me the most and kept me coming back for more. And I have a good idea why, but my number 1 film of the year each year is usually the one that as soon as it's over, I'm ready to replay it again. And I'm ready to watch it again, to see what I missed, to see what I catch on a repeat viewing. So, here we go. Number 5, Love Lies Bleeding, director Rose Glass, starring Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien. The Substance is number 4, directed by Coralie Farjat, starring Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. Number 3, I Saw the TV Glow, directed by Jane Schoenbrunn, with Justice Smith and Bridget Lundy Payne as the leads. Number 2 is actually Hitman, by director Richard Linklater, starring Glen Powell and Adria Arjona. And then number 1 is none other than Kneecap, directed by Rich Pepiot and the band members of Kneecap, which I'm not going to say their names because they are spoken in Gaelic, spoken in Irish, and I would butcher them. I'm not going there. But it also has Michael Fassbender in a supporting role, and a very small role, but a very important one to the film. And this is the story of the band Kneecap that started in Northern Ireland in, I want to say they said 2017, 2018, and they are a Irish rap group that raps in Irish, which is a separate language, if you didn't know, from what is the main language in Ireland. Fascinating premise. These guys that are speaking their native tongue in their native land, and yet they are outsiders because of it. And they are using their rap and their lifestyles to stick a middle finger up to the British government and saying, get it out of our country. We are our own country. The troubles of the 70s and 80s are over. This is our country now.
Speak English.
There's more Gaelic. Gach focal Gaelic a literature.
Shapiller, Skater, Sensational.
Like I discovered the Beatles. If the Beatles were
And it is offensive, it is vulgar, and it is rebellious in the best ways possible. These guys, non-actors by the way, acting in a feature-length film, deliver some of the best performances of the year. Untrained, they got trained to act for this film 6 months before starting filming. Everyone but Michael Fassbender is basically brand new to film. They've acted in music videos before and whatnot, but man, you would not know it watching this movie. They seem like professional I mean, they are now. They are now professional actors. But for this to be their feature, their debut film behind the camera, it's extraordinary. It is brimming with energy. It has visual flares from Rich Pepiot, which I believe this might be his first feature length too. If not, it's one of his first, and definitely the one that's getting the most acclaim. The creative flares on the camera side are excellent, and they add to the story each step of the way. The story itself is very, very intricate, and it's not a biopic necessarily. One of the interviews I heard coming out of Sundance was these guys talking about their film influences and, you know, how they approached this movie, which is a true story for the most part, but it's definitely, you can see it's fictionalized in some ways. Their number one influence is obviously Trainspotting. It's got that same drug-induced energy, and it works so well here. Their second influence that I heard them talk about was Fargo, which was kind of bizarre to me because it's a very, very different style film. But the way that the director put it was, you know, at the beginning of Fargo, where the slide comes up and it says, everything that happens in this movie is true for the most part, except for the things that aren't, right? So it's like, these events are true and they did take place, but they've been fictionalized in a way to create a compelling story that doesn't seem like it's just a documentary or anything like that. It's a work of fiction that is also completely true. And I love that dynamic. I love Fargo. I love Trainspotting. And that approach to telling this story is the perfect way to approach it, because it allows some blurring of the lines, it allows some dramatization, but in the end, this is the kneecap story. And this is where they come from, and this is why they have blown up into this international success. And man, do I hope that they get the best foreign language film Oscar. I don't know if they'll win it. I hope they at least get nominated. It's a phenomenal film, and I recommend everyone checking it out because it tells a contemporary story that's very important to indigenous people and indigenous languages that can oftentimes be overlooked. When's the last time you thought about the Troubles in Ireland? Right? This is the generation that comes after the Bobby Sands generation, where there's no more blowing up of cars necessarily on a daily basis, but there is still oppression in that country that needs to be addressed. And this little spunky, rebellious film does a perfect job of showing all of that. My number 2, Hitman, I've talked about a bit already. Again, I love Richard Linklater. I love Glenn Powell. I won't go too much more into it because I think I've covered mainly what I wanted to say about it. But again, the chemistry, the subversiveness of the genre, it all really hit me good. Oh, and this is another movie, kind of like Kneecap. So maybe this is another theme that I didn't even realize that I had in my films, that is based off true events and really technically happened, but is dramatized in a way that makes it compelling and is probably the most fun way to tell this story. It's not necessarily the most impactful or meaningful like Kneecap is, but it's a fun way to tell the story that actually happened.
By the way, my name is Gary Johnson, and
I'm a fake hitman.
I realize not everyone fantasized about the same hitman.
Every sting operation was a performance.
This is serious. I am in service business.
And each arrest was like a standing ovation.
I saw the TV glow. I don't know how to describe this. This is another film that deals with LGBTQ topics, this time in a high school where two people meet up, both kind of ambiguous on their sexuality, but they connect over this late night television program where they're sneaking out to each other's houses to watch this thing. And even though they come from very different backgrounds and they don't really have anything in common at school, they have this TV show in common. And different domestic issues come up through their conversation and through how they relate to the show, which are very interesting. Very well acted by both of the young actors in this, Justice Smith and Bridget Lundy Payne. And one of them ends up going missing. And there's a lot of surrealism in this movie. There's some pretty grotesque imagery, but not horror necessarily, just uncomfortableness. And I think that's one of the biggest emotional takeaways from this film is the uncomfortableness of these two characters and how they don't feel like they belong, but they're able to connect over this shared interest in the TV show. It goes into some interesting places, and I really enjoyed the character development of the Justice Smith character a lot. He goes through a very interesting development throughout the film. And it's kind of just one that you gotta get sucked into. Kind of like how these kids get sucked into this TV show.
Sometimes the pink opaque feels more real than real life.
Mary, it was a TV show.
Are you sure that's all it was?
It's kind of just a journey for them to find themselves and find themselves after being split up for a long time and see if that connection is still there. Next one is the last of my top 5 that I watched of the year. So I have the least amount of time to reflect on it as opposed to the others, and that's The Substance. But I was so blown away. Like, I had such a gut reaction to this film that I knew that it had to be pretty high up on my list. And Demi Moore, I didn't know she had it in her still, but man, she is insane in this movie. And the body horror and the grotesque nature of everything that's going on in this movie, it all adds to the conceit of destroying ourselves for public acknowledgement, for acceptance in this modern world. And that's also another thing that was true in a lot of movies this year, but this one, man, it's visually a trip. And
this is The Substance.
I'm Sue.
You're hired.
Let's go.
I was never bored during it. I'll tell you that much. It is from start to finish just a ride, and a ride that has a lot to say about current gender norms, current societal pressures, and again, I have the least amount of reflection, and I'd probably want to see it again just before I write up a full review or anything like that on it. But it's a ride, man. It's a ride. And this next one's a ride, too. I got a lot of rides this year in the movies. A lot of movies where they ended, and I just had to sit for a minute and be like, whoa, what did I just watch? That was insane. And this one was Love Lies Bleeding, which definitely ends on a crazy, bizarre note that I won't spoil. But if you're in it in the beginning, then you can kind of see how it ends up where it does. I guess I'll put it that way. It's a neo-noir, very dark story about two lesbian lovers who fall in love at a bodybuilding gym, and there's steroids involved, there's murder involved, there's a local drug lord involved. Kristen Stewart, one of our finest working actresses, and a newcomer, Katie O'Brien, she really impressed me, just as a very physical performance. I mean, you can see in the trailers or the promos or anything, she is a hulk of a woman. And she's just this presence on screen throughout the entire movie. And the other performance in here, which rounds out the trifecta, is Ed Harris as Kristen Stewart's dad. And he is a menace on screen. He plays one of the most frightening father figures I've seen in a while. And it really works for the story. It really works for the tone of the movie. And he frightened me multiple times throughout this. And the dynamic between the three of them is just a joy to watch. It's gritty. There's murder, there's steroids, there's love.
This here's Jackie.
Hi.
She needs a job. Says she'll do anything.
Yeah, you like guns?
Not really.
What the fuck you doing here then?
It's a noir. It's a neo-noir in all the best ways. And definitely recommend checking it out. So if you've made it this far, listening to me talk about some of my favorite movies from last year, I very much appreciate it. I'm brand new to this, as you can probably tell. This is a pretty bare bones setup, but I hope that it can lead to something interesting. It can lead to me just talking about movies some more, because that's what I love to do. And if you're interested in all in that, then I would love a follow. I would love a like. Those things are all going to be very important to me starting this off. If you can forgive some of the jankiness and forgive some of the rough edges, I'm going to do my best to clean up all of that. I look forward to the editing learning curve in a lot of ways, so bear with me with that as well, as I just find my voice and find how I want to tell stories on this platform. And yeah, send me suggestions too, because like I said, I'm brand new at this, so anything you think that you would like to see or be worked on for the future, I'm game, man. I have no pride when it comes to being told that I should do something different or do something better. So I appreciate you all listening, and if you had a favorite movie from last year, maybe comment that wherever you get your podcasts. This will be up on all platforms. I eventually want to put it on YouTube as well. We'll see how the edit on that goes. But yeah, I'm excited. Starting the new year off with something that could be pretty fun and lead to some good discussion about one of my favorite things to talk about. So on that note, I've been Zaxby. You've all been great. I'll catch you on the next one.